Ephesians 5, 3-5. But sexual immorality and any impurity or greed should not even be heard of among you, as is proper for saints. Obscene and foolish talking or crude joking are not suitable, but rather giving thanks. For know and recognize this: every sexually immoral or impure or greedy person who is an idolater does not have an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. It's interesting. The first word we're going to look at is very simple, and it is this. This is but. And that's because of. So everything before this leads up to this statement. But because of what Jesus did, because you have a new spirit, because you've been given over to unity, because you're living a life of love focused on others and not just focused on yourself, sexual immorality and any impurity or greed should not even be heard of among you, as is proper for saints. There is so much wrapped up in that one little word. And you can say, because of the previous 4 chapters in the last 2 verses, these things should not be taking place. Puts a lot of weight on it, but that's a good thing. The other word we look at is this: sexual immorality. That's any sexual sin. Any sexual sin, whether it's what we look at, what we touch, what we hear, what we say, it covers everything. Sexual immorality should not even be heard of among you. It should be like, oh, did you hear about so-and-so? No way, that's unheard of. I could never believe that. That's the type of reputation and practice we're supposed to have. Why? Because it leaves open doors for the enemy to attack us. There's so much behind this, but just knowing sexual immorality, whether it's what we watch, whether it's who we're with, whatever, sexual immorality, it's a very broad term, opens doors for the enemy to attack us. And it's not worth it. Like, that's a key, is that it's not worth it. The other word we look at is this word, impurity. That's any dirty, immoral behavior. Now, we'll see in just a little bit as we get to the end of verse 4, sex, marriage, everything that takes place in between those 2 words, right? Sex and marriage, which is where it's for, which is God's design, is not dirty, is not inappropriate. The Bible says the marriage bed is undefiled, which means as long as you're married and you two agree that it is pure before God. This is talking about any dirty or immoral behavior. That's pretty broad. That's very broad. But it says, hey, because you're a believer, because you're a saint, this shouldn't even be talked about among you. It shouldn't even be heard of among you. The other word is this. This is interesting. The word greed is talked about. This is, both the word impurity and greed can be general sense, but in the context, this is relating to sexuality. You say, wow, greed, like I think of Wall Street. No, this is actual sexual greed. You think of, where does rape come from? Sexual greed. Where does adultery and cheating on your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your spouse, where does it come from? It comes from greed and selfishness. It says greed should not even be heard of among you. 1, you shouldn't be talking about these 3 things. We'll see that in a little bit. Nor should you be practicing any of these things. Why? Why? I don't understand. Because marriage represents our relationship to Jesus and the cross. God says, hey, there is one way I can describe my relationship with you, and that is setting yourself aside for me. And that is the intimacy of marriage relationship. That's why God guards marriage so much, is because it was the only way that we would understand the importance and the preciousness of our relationship with Him. And what minimizes that? Sexual immorality. It says it should not be heard of among you, as is proper for saints. Say, I want to be godly. I want to be accepted by God, so I'm going to stay away from these things. That's not what is being said. What it is saying is, if you've been saved, you will stop being immoral. You'll stop being impure. You'll stop being greedy. Because of this, it affects this area. It affects this area. It affects this area. And he says, because of this, because you've become a believer, this is going to fade away. It says you are a saint, not a void, so you can be a saint. You see the difference? He says, I've called you. You're saved. You're a believer. You've received a new spirit. So this isn't a part of your life anymore. Let me get rid of that so we can, there we go. Because the next word we're going to look at is obscene. And the word obscene has no context for bad language. It's not swearing in any way. It has nothing to do. It's true, as believers, we shouldn't have anything to do with it, but that's not the context of this. We've got to go super fast. Obscene. This is dirty behavior. It kind of goes in line with the word impurity above. The next word is foolish talking. And this is interesting. The literal word is to turn of speech. That is turning any conversation into a sexual innuendo, turning any conversation into inappropriate. Now think of the show not that long ago of The Office. The Office was a TV show that was very, very popular, and it was very popular for one phrase, or at least some of its popularity was for this, and it was the phrase, "That's what she said." And it turned everything into something inappropriate. It would be something just normal that anybody would say, but adding the words, "that's what she said," would turn it into something dirty. That is what applies there, the word foolish talking. And it affected so many believers, and it turned their mind towards what was inappropriate, foolish talking. The other is coarse jesting. That word has the idea of taking anything pure and turning it impure. So just normal phrases, normal words, and then just turning it so that it sounds or appears dirty or inappropriate. There's a verse that says, "To the pure, all things are pure." That's why we have to be very careful what we joke about, what we take into our minds, what we think about. God has designed us so that we would be shielded and protected. And there's innocence in there. We say, oh man, I don't want to be sheltered. If there was someone who was shooting in our store that we were in, the first thing we would want to do is be sheltered and protected. And God says there's something more dangerous, and that is what the enemy uses against us. This is crude joking, turning a word, turning what's moral and pure into something that's impure. But he says, rather giving thanks. This is interesting here, where it says rather giving thanks. We're talking about all of these things, sexual immorality, impurity, greed, all of these things, especially greed. And he says, hey, you know what? All of this, it's not that it's the sexual activity is inappropriate. He says it's inappropriate outside or before marriage. And when it is in marriage, it is something that we can be thankful for. Next verse is in verse 5. It says, for no one recognizes this. Every sexually immoral or impure or greedy person who is an idolater does not have an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ. The word we're going to look at is this. Everyone whose life pattern is these things should be afraid. Because when we have the Holy Spirit, we have the conviction of the Holy Spirit, and he encourages us to do what's right, and he discourages us from doing what's wrong. And if we can live a sexually immoral, if we can have an impure mind and an impure action, and we can be greedy as far as it is sexually, then we are worshiping something else rather than God. And because of that, it reveals we don't have a relationship with him. When we feel conviction, when we feel that this is wrong and we ignore it and then it goes away, it's something we should be afraid of. So when it comes to this, every one of these things, if it's part of our daily life pattern and we feel no conviction of the Holy Spirit, we say, you know what, I don't care, I'm going to do what I want. We need to take a serious look and have a conversation with God. God, am I really saved? God, what is my relationship with you? The other is this. If we're struggling with these things, there's a difference between struggling and just not caring. If we're not caring, we need to be afraid. If we're struggling, we need to go to God and say, give me strength. I want to follow you. And He will allow us and give us the strength and the ability to follow Him because He always forgives us. The Holy Spirit is there to speak to us and then equip us, not just condemn us. So have a conversation with God. God, I don't want this in my life. I want to follow you. I want to be a saint. I want to do things your way, not my way. I don't want to be an idolater of myself or what I want. And He says, I will give you the desires of your heart.